In this lesson we're going to look at what we mean by the words alkali and base. Although perhaps you might think that these are the same, there are in fact some important differences between the two, which I'd like to try and highlight in this lesson. So by the word base, what do we mean by a base? First of all, where a base can be thought of as a substance which neutralizes an acid. Right? So if this red circle here represents all of the substances which are bases, then what we can say is that all of those bases are able to neutralize an acid. Now, within this set of substances with bases, there is another set of substances which we call alkalis, and an alkali is a substance which dissolves in water to produce hydroxide ions. So let's just take some examples to highlight the distinction. So for example, you could class calcium carbonate or limestone, for example, as a base, because if you add calcium carbonate to dilute hydrochloric acid, for example, it will neutralize the hydrochloric acid to produce calcium chloride and water and carbon dioxide. It neutralizes the acid. But calcium carbonate is insoluble in water, so it cannot dissolve in water to produce hydroxide ions. So calcium carbonate is a base, right? It neutralizes an acid, but it is not an alkali, since it won't dissolve in water to produce hydroxide ions. Whereas sodium hydroxide, for example, is an alkali that will dissolve in water to produce hydroxide ions, and it is also a base because it will neutralize an acid. So we can say that all alkalis are bases. They are always capable of neutralizing an acid, but not all bases are alkalis. Not all of them are soluble in water and produce hydroxide ions. So for example, calcium carbonate, as we just mentioned. Another example is copper oxide. Copper oxide will dissolve in weak hydrochloric acid or weak sulfuric acid to produce copper chloride or copper sulfate, depending on the acid, plus water. In other words, it will neutralize the acid if you add enough of the copper oxide, but it will not dissolve in water to produce hydroxide ion. So although it is a base, it cannot be classified as an alkali. Another example of a base might be zinc carbonate, and another oxide that's a base, and another common oxide that's also a base is iron 2 oxide. Likewise, another substance which acts as an alkali would be, for example, sodium carbonate, which you'll notice doesn't have the hydroxide group, but nevertheless acts as an alkali because when it dissolves in water, it causes hydroxide ions to be produced, and is therefore classed not only as a base but also as an alkali.